Okay, today is the 10th of June, 2014, and the title of our discussion is The Debate About God versus Evolution. My guest is John Keifer, Republican lawyer who teaches business law at Ohio University, and I am a left-wing Democrat and a professional historian who retired from the classroom at Ohio University after 40 years of experience, mostly at Ohio University. And this is the Athens Speakout, number 314. Now, John Keifer wrote a very provocative letter to the Athens Messenger on the 30th of May. And this letter has a headline like that. And the headline says, "More than an argument of God versus evolution." And I'm critical of his first paragraph because his first paragraph talks about another letter writer by the name of Ron Luce. And I think I might agree with John's criticism of Luce because I'm also a little bit critical of Luce. But I'll ask the first question of John. Do you want to comment on Luce's opinion? I think I'll show the audience his letter. He has an earlier letter, 5 days earlier. And the headline of that letter is, "One Nation Under God, Patriotic Practice, Not Religious." And it's got a cartoon. And the cartoon is pretty clever. It shows a Christian conservative or fundamentalist, a woman, with an American flag on her chest and a Bible with a cross on it in her hand. And then she has a little boy, a football player, about 12 years old with a helmet on, and a little girl about 4 or 5. Now, over on the left side of the cartoon, there is a tall, thin Muslim with the title Taliban on his belt, and he's carrying an AK-47, and the two figures are talking to one another. And if you go back to the right and look at the lady, she says, "It is time we return religion back to our institutions." And then the Muslim says, "Religion worked for us." And he's got a Taliban belt, and it looks like he's some kind of a terrorist. And then at the bottom, it describes who Ron Luce is. He is a long-time Athens County resident. He's been active in preserving and sharing the county's rich historical tradition. And he is an educator, a writer, an actor, a printer, an activist for human rights, and an advocate for abused and neglected children. And he's an active volunteer. Okay, do you want to say anything about that, or do you want to pass and go on to a different subject?
No, and what Ron was, and I don't know Ron.
Have you ever met him?
I have not met him.
I've not met him either.
But his concern was with a state court decision
Right.
that found a patriotic connection to faith. And I think that, and it's true that in the House of Representatives, it has on the wall, I think it says, "In God We Trust." It's on our currencies. And it all dates from the 50s when we were, concerned about communism. And quite frankly, there are a lot of people who believe strongly in terms of their faith, but they do not agree that it should have any place in the public arena, and particularly in schools. So I was using his concern as a stepping stone to address the issue of what I consider to be the science is now teaching us, basically confirming many of the lessons of ancients, dating all the way back to ancient Babylon, about what Thomas Sowell would refer to as a common vision about our values and beliefs. So
I don't know Thomas Sowell. Who is he?
He's a gentleman at the Hoover Institute. He's an African American who he's an intellectual, gifted intellectual, who's written a lot about his concerns with your left-wing nonsense.
Would you say he's a Christian? Is he a fundamentalist Christian or a Catholic? What is he?
I have no idea.
You have no
I assume
idea?
He's a Christian.
Okay.
And it's not a question of fundamentalism. It's a question of a lot of the teachings, and I'm not just talking Christianity, but the Muslim faith, the Jewish faith, so on and so forth. Much of what science now is teaching us is a confirmation of what the ancients were teaching us in stories.
I don't know
like
who
the Good
you
Samaritan.
mean by the ancient. Who are these ancients?
The ancients would be Babylon, Greece,
They were mystics.
China.
Do you believe in astrology?
No,
Is that science?
No, but they all had a. Well, you're missing the point.
Okay, I am.
Right.
Because I don't understand your understanding of science.
Yeah, if you look at what there's a gentleman at Emory, Dr. DeWall.
Now wait a
who
minute.
Studies primates.
Oh, now he's an
called
anthropologist.
He's a bioethicist.
A bioethicist.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Well,
that's-
that's another discipline.
That's what I'm saying. There's a convergence across different disciplines of science, neuroscience, what they're able to determine about our thought process and where thought and
Well, neuroscience was invented in the 20th century, and I don't think it has anything to do with the ancients.
well, but you're missing the point, Bob. What mankind from the period of the ancients clear through to today has been telling us about what we consider the values. Take the Good Samaritan, for instance, the story.
All right, now the Good Samaritan is a story in the New Testament, and that Jesus talks about. Well, Jesus, first of all, was a Jew, and Jesus at that time was in a tribal community, and there were Israelites and Judah. There were two tribes.
Right.
But they also had another group called Samaritans. Now the Samaritans were not Jews. They were an alien tribe.
They were alien tribe. They were looked down upon
By the Jews.
by the Jews.
Right.
To go to Judea, Jews were not allowed to go through Samaria.
That's right. Now that's history.
But
That's not anthropology.
well, no, it's history. But it's what the point of the Good Samaritan story is that the Jewish lawyer was quizzing Jesus on
Right.
the faith.
Do you follow the law of Moses?
And
You're supposed to obey the Sabbath,
and-
and you're supposed to rest on the Sabbath.
Right, but the storyline is that there was a Jewish high priest and then a Levite, both of whom, upon coming upon this beaten,
Yeah, he was on the side of the road as
side of
crippled.
the road,
Wouldn't help him.
they went to the other side of the road.
That's right.
And passed by.
That's right.
Whereas the Good Samaritan addressed his needs.
Well, Jesus addressed his needs.
No, the Good Samaritan. The story is of the Good
Oh,
Samaritan.
the Jews. Wait a minute. The Good Samaritan saved a Jewish victim.
Right.
Okay, I got it a little bit
Okay.
twisted. You're right.
Yeah, so here you have this idea that, we have a moral obligation to
Right.
care for each other.
Right.
And now it's a gentleman by the name of Coleman writes a book on emotional intelligence. Oh, big deal.
Well, you jump back from
Well,
the first century to the 20th century, and I, as a historian, can't follow that.
Okay. Well,
Now, I know what Jesus said.
What I'm saying is, if
Yeah.
you look at where science is today,
Today, okay.
yeah, the primates, okay, DeWall's work shows that they're pro-social. They show empathy for each other. They have a sense of fairness, a sense of reciprocity. They're cooperative.
At the 2-year-old level.
As a primate. And to give you an example, he ran experiments where he had 2 primates, and the lab technician, they were in their individual habitat or cage. And the one primate had both green chips and red chips.
Right.
And the lab technician, when the primate gave him a red chip, he gave him a grape. When the primate eventually gave him a green chip,
Right.
he then gave a grape not only to that primate, but to the other primate.
Right.
So
and the chimpanzees are better than the baboons and so forth.
primate. I mean,
There are about a dozen
no,
primates,
yeah, I know.
and
But-
they have
but-
different level of intelligence.
But what I'm saying, it's not a matter of intelligence as much as it is
Have you ever had a psychology course?
the source of our emotion is what's called the limbic system
Right, that's biology.
and biology.
Right.
Well, he's a bioethicist.
Okay.
Right? And so the word emotion comes from the same root word as motion.
Yeah.
And what activates us.
Right.
And so here these bonobos are handing out, when he started handing him the grape upon receiving a green chip, he then gave the grape to the other one. So he started giving them all green chips.
Right. So he has a 2-year-old level of morality, but he can't deal with a 12-year-old or 22-year-old morality of a human being who matures and changes his moral system.
Well,
He can't read a book about Plato.
No, but
Okay.
but here's the interesting thing.
Okay.
My feeling is, and when I teach
Law?
my students, well, it's in law as well as in
Okay,
management.
fine.
If you have the sense of cognitive dissonance, when the feelings are not compatible with what you're thinking or doing, is where you get into difficulty. And I explain to them, if you're asked to do something or you're doing something that doesn't feel right, that's a moral or an ethical problem for you.
There is such a thing as conscience. And
The
there is a
conscience
Jewish
is-
conscience, there is a Christian conscience.
Yeah, but they're all, if you look at the ancient teachings,
Whose teachings?
well, you start with the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Okay, the Old Testament,
Yeah.
they had a conscience.
Yeah, the Muslims.
The who?
The Muslims.
The Quran had a
The
different
Quran.
conscience.
It's not different. there are specifics that are different, but for instance, and this is the point, universally, everyone believes in the thought that you should do unto others as you would want them to do unto you.
Christianity believes that.
Jews, Christians, Muslims,
I think-
Hindus, Buddhists. Trust me, Bob, it's universal.
I want to see their text.
It's universal.
I want to see that text.
Well,
You're a lawyer. Do you believe, if there's a witness in court, do you believe anything a witness tells you?
no, I don't. But
Okay.
But if you
Now, I think that the text of Confucius and the text of Buddha are somewhat similar, but they're not identical.
we're not talking about whether you hand something to a person with your right or left hand. We're talking about
I'm talking about
fundamental
do unto others
Yeah.
as you would do
have them do unto
to you.
the golden rule.
And there's also a saying by Jesus, love thy neighbor as thyself.
Right.
Now, I met a
Which is
Jew. I
very-
met a Jew. I met a Jew now when I began teaching, okay? And I didn't know as much about Judaism as he knew. And he didn't know as much about Christianity. But he knew more about Christianity than I knew about Judaism.
Yeah.
Because the Jews in their education in the United States learn about their own religion, and they also know sharp differences between Catholics, Lutherans, all kinds of sects, okay? So he said, he just asked me a question. What do you as a Christian believe? And I said, love thy neighbor as thyself. You know what he did? He replied to me, who is thy neighbor?
Well, that's what Jesus asked in the story of the Good Samaritan.
And what did Jesus say?
That's when he launched into the story of the Good Samaritan. He said
That the Samaritan is the neighbor.
At the end of the passage in Luke, at the end of the passage, he looks at the lawyer,
Right.
and he asked him, who was the better?
Okay, yeah.
And he said it was the Samaritan.
Yeah, the better. Now that's a little bit different than your
No,
neighbor.
no, love thy neighbor as thyself. Who was the neighbor? Who
Yeah.
was the who understood the concept, basically?
Of good and evil.
No, the concept of
Treat your neighbor as thyself.
Yeah.
Treat the stranger. I think the Jewish word is stranger.
Yeah.
The Jews have an obligation to treat strangers with dignity.
Yeah.
I think that's throughout the whole Testament,
yeah.
right?
Well, see, the whole story of Jesus, I think.
And the Samaritans were strangers. They spoke a different language.
But they were seen as unclean, beneath.
Yeah, that's right. By the average
Jew.
high class Jew. You had the Pharisees,
Yeah.
the Sadducees, and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
Now, Jesus was a carpenter, and Paul was a tent maker, and they were down with the common people.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And so, but
So there was a difference in their ethics.
I don't know how you're using the word ethics. I mean.
Good and evil, right and wrong. Now, you as a lawyer must know that if there's a guy on trial for his life for murder, that the law of Moses says, thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very clear
Right.
in Jewish law and Christian law. Now, you can argue whether what kind of a penalty. Does he deserve the death penalty? Is a self-defense and so forth and so on. But there's a very clear distinction in the Jewish religion and the Christian religion of the difference between right and wrong, good and evil. And my father told me that.
Yeah.
Did you ever go to church? Where are you getting your morality from?
Well, I'm not. I guess it comes down to how we define ethic or morality.
Okay. How do you define it? What did you do in law school?
I wrote another letter to the editor over the IRS,
Yeah.
and I said, and the problem with ethics is that you can rationalize it. You know, we're very clever. I mean, Ben Franklin said this. He said, you know, tell me where you want to end
Some
up
men
and
can rationalize.
Yeah.
Some men are literal and can't rationalize. And some men have a very low understanding of ethics. And some men have maturity.
But the bottom line is that you have this ability to rationalize. So how do you know what
Each man
you
has to
consider
decide
be
himself.
ethical? Yeah.
Each man has to decide
But
himself.
there's universalities in that
If
part of our
there was
being.
such thing as universalities, there would all be one religion now, but
No,
there
no,
isn't.
No, I don't. We all have to, as Mr. Blakely, my 8th grade teacher, once said, he said, all the roads lead to the same place, it's just some are paved with gold.
Well, you in your letter, you talk about morality. Let me go back to your letter.
Yeah.
Your letter talks about morality,
Yeah.
and I agree with that part of the letter.
The point of
now
my,
you're telling me that paragraph didn't make any sense.
No.
What do you
That
say?
letter was basically saying that given that science has finally caught up to what the history has been teaching us in sacred writings since the beginning of our, recorded history, that finally science has agreed with that. In other words, we see this kind of behavior using functional MRIs. We see it in mammalian behavior. They're now studying dogs and other mammals to determine this. But Socrates said we're social animals with the capacity for reason. I mean, this realization has been there, but we've eschewed it because we've gotten away from the concept of we put too much emphasis on science that we didn't understand. Most people think that, and I'm guilty of this too. Most people think that Darwin, in his Origins of the Species, was talking about life's creation. He wasn't. He was talking about evolution. He never once talked about that somehow miraculously living cells came into being that then evolved into other things. He only talked about evolution.
What I like about that statement is you limit this to what Darwin said in the Origin of Species.
Right.
But that didn't become we and all scientists. There's been an evolution of science since Darwin's death.
Confirming evolution.
Yeah, well, I think you and I agree on evolution. That's not a problem here.
Yeah.
But what is a problem is that you have a sentence in here that fellow man are a necessity for theories that act morally and ethically in that regard. And I agree with that sentence.
Right.
And I'm telling you that the history of the world is that there have been 10,000 tribes. There are 4 or 5 major religions today: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Confucianism, Hinduism. They define morality a lot differently. Have you ever read the book of Leviticus?
Not completely. But
not completely.
No,
well, I've never read a word of it.
Yeah, but here, well, let's go there.
Okay, go ahead.
I think what the story of Christ is that what makes it a beautiful story is that the Jews became so juristic.
Yeah, okay.
So
the letter of the law
legalistic.
rather than the spirit of the law.
The spirit of the law.
Right,
the
you
letter
got
of
it.
the law. And he said the meaning of the true value is one of love.
Right.
Loving your fellow
Absolutely.
man. He came to rid us of the curse of the tree.
Okay.
It's talked about in one of the chapters of the New Testament. What is the curse of the tree? It's like a stockade. If you violate those petty little rules, you're tied to a tree, so you feel humiliated and
Okay.
a sense of shame and that sort of thing. And it's almost as if you believe in God, that God felt that the Jewish people had become off course where he wanted them to be,
Right.
and he tried to put them back on course in terms of, no, it's about the loving, that.
Well, Jesus had a lot to say about love.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was his message, right?
Yeah.
And consequently, and then what happened when all these Christian sects, they started going down the rule path, People, and it's sort of like...
you're talking about in the United States.
Yeah.
We have the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses,
Yeah.
we have the Roman
but
Catholics.
they all became their own,
Each priest
pattern.
each priest and minister thinks that he can speak for God.
Well, no. That I wouldn't say that. I think that would be consistent with the Catholic belief. That
Well, what does the minister
speaks
say
to
when he's a Baptist down in the South? He says,
well, then he
you have to follow God. God tells us this, that, and the other thing. But how does what part of God does he quote?
But I wouldn't go to that guy's church.
You wouldn't go to that church, okay? Neither would I.
Yeah, I think at best your preacher is a teacher.
He's supposed to be a
Who's
teacher.
been studying
Right.
in more depth and trying to understand it. And
Right.
trying
He
to help
supposedly
you
has a
understand.
mature theology,
Right.
which knows the thing. But there are some preachers who speak on the level of the 8th grade. There are some who can go to the 12th grade.
Absolutely.
And there are some who can go to a PhD.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah. And the ones that can go to a PhD are boring as well. So. I remember I was in one church, and I came out of the church, and I said to my wife, and I said, I feel like I missed the prerequisite courses there. I got nothing out of it. So.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Now, did you ever meet Art Gish?
I know who he was. I never met him.
Never met him. Okay. Well, I've met a lot of different people, and they always ask me, "Are you a Christian?" Then I ask them, "All right, what is your definition of Christianity?" And as I say, when I met this Jew, he said, "What is a Christian?" I said, "Love thy neighbor as thyself." Now, I could have said, "God is love," and that would have been true too, but I didn't think of it at the time, see.
Yeah.
I just happened to come across that passage. And then he asked me about the neighbor. And when he asked me about the neighbor, I didn't think of the Samaritan.
Yeah, that's right.
I had heard of the story, but that was way back in the 1st century. I was thinking of the neighbors I met in New York. Well, I met Irish, I met Jews, I was thinking of that kind of a neighbor.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the friendly village I lived in Long Island. When I went to school, we had Catholics, we had Italian Americans, we had one Chinese American, we had one Jewish American. About 1/3 of the public school were Catholics. See, well, usually the Catholic didn't talk to the Protestant. They'd just say, "Are you a Protestant?" They say, "Yeah, okay, Protestant." Well, you go to your church, I go to mine, and you never had any further discussion.
Right. And that's a shame.
Well, that's what it was in Long Island, in a large community.
Yeah.
See.
Yeah.
Now, anyway, I kind of got off on a subject.
No, not really. This idea of loving your neighbor is a belief that transcends Christianity.
Yes, that's true.
It goes,
Yes, that's true. I think that the Muslims, and they're very famous for that, for welcoming the stranger. If you go to an Arab community and they don't know you,
they're better than us.
They'll say, "Okay, sit down, we'll have a dinner," and so forth and so on.
They're better than us.
Because they don't know who the stranger is.
Yeah.
But then after the stranger stays there a long time and he starts giving a religion that's a little bit different,
Oh, no.
he closes his ears.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to see there's a certain point where you start disagreeing about fine points, you see.
Yeah, and there's no, those kind of discussions are pointless, I think.
Yeah, you have to give up at a certain point.
Well, not give up, but just,
Well, I mentioned God Gish because...
It's based on faith.
Oh, we got to stop. Is this the halfway point? Yep. Well, we have to stop here. What we do is usually remind the audience who we are. My name is Robert Whaley, retired historian. And this is John Keifer, who teaches business law, and I'm pretty sure he has a sense of morality. And we're having a great discussion about Darwin and Christianity, and we have had some fringe discussions. Okay, do you want to ask the next question, or where do we go from here?
Oh, I'm here to respond.
Okay, you're here to respond. Well,
I have 18 questions.
Yeah, well, I think we got through. We got through about. I think we've covered for the first two.
Okay.
I think we've kind of gotten that, and we've jumped ahead in a way. I was going to say something about. I don't know if we. Well, I think we've introduced the subject. Let's look at my question 3.
Okay.
What are the religious attitudes of the 9 justices of the Supreme Court today?
Well, Scalia is an ardent, devout Catholic. There's
That's true.
no question about it.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a new book out about him, and it talks about his faith. What I didn't know about Scalia was his father was a fairly intellectual guy. Had a master's degree in literature and whatnot. And by the way, he was one of my professors in law
You
school.
met Scalia?
Oh, he was my professor. Yeah.
Wow. This is University of where?
University of Virginia, Charlottesville.
He taught there.
Yeah.
But then he went on to Harvard or Yale or someplace. I don't think he got his degree at Virginia.
No, he got it at Chicago.
Oh, he got it at Chicago.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what's interesting about his, he's an originalist, right? What they call a textualist.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that is he taught contracts.
Yeah.
So, and I would have, I went to hear him speak up at Ohio State, and I would have loved to be able to ask a question. But a student started hacking at him, and he got he's fairly volatile. And I didn't get to ask the question, but I was going to ask him, Prof, you were my professor, does the fact that you were steeped in contracts and Uniform Commercial Code law have any impact on your reading of the Constitution? Because there you're trying to decipher the text,
Yeah.
what the intent of the parties was. So I would have loved to have been able to ask him that question. So he is very clearly a devout Catholic.
And he believes what we call natural law. Does he have a dogmatic view of natural law?
No, he's a textualist. In other words,
He throws natural law out.
no, the Constitution. He reads the text. Okay, he
Yeah.
reads what is the words and how it was understood at the time.
Well, I guess the Constitution doesn't mention natural law, does it?
No.
But certain judges did.
Oh, well, when we teach the sources of law, natural law is one of them. Incidentally, that natural law concept comes from the
Romans.
Judeo-Christian.
Yeah, it came from the Romans before.
Well, the Judeo-Christian belief in, that God created Earth and
Right.
all
Right.
the forces of Earth, and
Right.
so you're just trying to decipher those
Right.
realities
Right.
as a natural lawyer. But that's been, the concern today is the more progressive approach is to kind of make it up, whatever feels good. And what Scalia would say is, that's not right, because when it comes down to your personal feelings about what should happen, you're not acting like a judge, you're acting like a legislator, you're making policy. And I think he's right, I really do.
But he switches. He says he's an originalist, but sometimes he invents new doctrine.
No. But let me give you an example.
Okay.
Thermography is a technology that allows you to sense heat, sensitive. So you can sense inside of a building.
Right.
You can get a profile of people, and the police used that to find that there was somebody in a building hiding. They had no warrant. They went in and grabbed the guy. And Scalia held that that's a Fourth Amendment violation. He said that, looking at from a textualist standpoint, could I just go into the building without a warrant? No. Well, to go into it with technology, you're still going in without a warrant. So,
Yeah.
So he's been very consistent.
Yeah, but when he decided that outrageous case, Citizens United versus the Federal Election Committee, he didn't have any precedent to do that. He just invented his own theory, and that wasn't original. There's nothing original about corporate law.
Well, no.
This was all subjective opinion. Feelings. Yeah, he had plenty of feelings.
Now, corporations are considered a juridical person, okay?
Considered by courts. Courts invented that doctrine.
Well, they can sue and be sued. I mean, I can sue General Motors. God knows people are suing General Motors, okay?
Yeah, but that wasn't following precedent. That wasn't looking at the text.
No, well, it's a question of commercial speech.
Yeah.
It's a question of, here you have a taxpayer a juridical taxpayer whose interests are impacted by the political process.
That's true.
And therefore, you know, is it wrong that a taxpayer shouldn't have the ability to express their feelings? And they didn't say you could give money to a political party. They did not say you could give money to a candidate, but you could weigh in on political issues.
Now, wait a minute. There's unlimited contributions through the PACs. The Republican Party is buying every politician in the United States. That's bribery.
No, Soros. Soros is, you know, nobody cares about the way he spends his money, but the Koch brothers are suddenly bad people.
Well, I think Soros is a billionaire, and Soros is financing Obama.
Yeah.
I don't think Soros is innocent.
Okay. yeah. But,
in other words, both parties are being bought with cash.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with that.
And now, but that wasn't true under the first 6 presidents. I think that Washington...
Well, nobody had amassed a lot of cash.
Right, and they didn't have corporations then.
Well,
the first national corporation was the Pennsylvania Railroad in the 1850s. Now, they had the Dartmouth case. That was a kind of a corporation.
Yeah.
But that wasn't this collective entity with all kinds of anonymous rights, privileges.
Right.
The corporation has a tremendous amount of privilege. It's called the Limited Liability Act.
Yeah. Well, here's your problem.
Okay, good.
You look at one time, Islam
Yeah.
was far more advanced
That's
than
true.
the West.
That is true. From about 670 to about 1,000.
Okay.
And then in 1,000, they began to collapse.
What happened? No, they didn't begin to collapse, but when we accepted the concept of limited liability, and there was a lot of consternation in the mid 1800s. People felt that was like buying a lottery ticket. You know, very little downside risk, but huge potential upside risk. And so it was a moral issue.
Yes, true.
But when we recognized that if we're going to develop the country, we needed to, you know, and we had in terms of canals and railroads and oil and gas and everything, that we need to be able to amass capital to do that.
That's right.
And so we created the concept of limited liability.
That's right. It started in England.
And then we took off and we left the Islam with the Shariat law is very conservative in the sense that you've got to have skin in the game. In other words,
Okay.
By that I mean you have to have your own money invested.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of getting a bunch of people buying lottery tickets and then using their money.
Right. No debt.
Well, you could have debt, but you couldn't earn
You couldn't earn it. Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah. But so, you know, it explains a lot of what's good. If you look at what happened on Wall Street.
What year are we talking about now?
Well, I'm talking about the
2009, 1929?
No, the late 90s.
The late 90s, okay.
These firms were partnerships.
Yeah.
Goldman Sachs was a partnership. They said, why don't we incorporate?
Yeah.
That way we can amass a lot more capital and have a lot more wealth, control a lot more
And
wealth.
call debt assets.
So
Change the name of the game.
Well, they created a moral hazard for themselves. I don't think we'd have had the mess that Lehman Brothers and these firms got us into if they were using partnership assets.
Yeah.
They're using shareholder assets.
Okay.
And then paying themselves big bonuses. So, you know, there's good and bad in everything, right? And the downside is there is a moral hazard.
That's true. You have to have a Supreme Court which will enforce the law, the common law, and then after common law, legislature. The Congress makes the law, the president enforces the law, and the courts are supposed to interpret the law.
Right.
That was the beginning of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Now, our Constitution is in threadbare. It's being torn apart by big money. Speech is, a person is not speech. A person has two eyes, ears, mouth. Corporate personhood is an artificial entity created by some kind of a law.
Right.
I don't believe in it. I think that corporations should...
You believe in limited liability?
I think there could be a limited liability act, but there has to be congressional laws. Let's go back to Brandeis. Brandeis said either America's going to control these corporations or these corporations will control America. And he meant the United States government. And they are now have the power to control the legislature, the courts, and the president. Obama is bought and paid for. And before that, Bush was bought and paid for by corporate power, by the oil companies. And this began with Lyndon Johnson, Standard Oil.
Yeah.
The oil companies bought both parties.
They have a lot of influence.
Okay, good.
They have a lot of influence.
We have to limit.
I don't disagree. I
Okay,
don't
good.
disagree.
Debt does matter. That was Alan Breen said, debt doesn't matter. That guy should be put on trial.
Yeah.
He was a philosopher. His philosophy was Ayn Rand. Do you remember Ayn Rand?
Yeah.
Profits, no limit on anybody's profit.
Well,
Let the poor man starve.
What I play for my students is Milton Friedman.
Well, he's not as bad as Ayn Rand, but he's getting along that line.
But he's become the
Whipping boy.
Whipping boy.
Of the Democrats.
Milton Friedman back in 1970. He passed away a few years ago, but
Right.
in 1970 he basically said that the business of business is business.
All right.
But he put the caveat in it that they do it in a competitive environment
Okay.
and without fraud.
Okay, fraud is a crime. Embezzlement.
Yeah.
But it was not enforced by the Bush administration.
Well, fraud can be fraud on the public too when you sell
Yeah.
products that are
Right.
over, puffed and
Right.
or even dangerous.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's working a fraud. So,
Yeah.
But his statement was, this is a job of the shareholders,
Right.
in terms of charity or social responsibility, that you give the money. If you don't have a legitimate purpose, give it to the shareholders. Let them benefit the charities they choose to benefit. The one thing about Friedman that life changed after 1970 was globalization.
Yeah.
And who's our neighbor? Right? Little ladies working in China without proper ventilation and without
Right.
proper
Right.
protection and that
Right.
sort of thing. And that's where his
Right.
his at that time we were a national market. We could
Right.
control the.
Right.
We didn't have what I call regulatory arbitrage,
Right.
where you could
Right.
go to locations that
Right.
weren't as stringent in terms of health and safety. And
Right.
that sort of thing.
Right. So you can incorporate in Delaware, put your money in Cayman Islands, and take your profits out of Switzerland.
Yeah.
Who's on first?
Right.
What's on second? I don't know. Who's on third?
Yeah. Well, we now have I think it's close to $2 trillion or $1 trillion parked offshore.
Okay.
The question is, how do you get it back here?
Okay. Yeah,
You're
you got it. You got it.
You're not going to bring it back and pay a lot of tax on it.
Well, you mentioned Scalia. Do you want to mention about some of the other justices and this theme of religion? You said that Scalia was a Catholic, but what about John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, John Alito,
Alito?
and Anthony Kennedy, and Sonia.
She's Catholic.
Yeah, there are 6 Catholics on the court.
Kagan is Jewish.
Yeah, three
Byers
Jews.
is Jewish.
3 Jews.
The lady.
And what's unprecedented, no Protestant on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Stevens was the last one, and Obama, to my regret, should have appointed a Protestant if he wanted any kind of balance. But I don't trust Obama's religion. I don't think he knows anything about it.
Yeah. Well, if you want to bash Obama, I'll jump in and help you. So.
Okay, good.
I feel sorry for the guy. He's so far in over his head.
Okay.
And they all came rallying to get him reelected because he is the fatted calf in terms of controlling a lot of things.
Well, the Democrats did, but the Republicans voted against him.
Well, but I mean, there are Democrats today who are running away from him and criticizing him.
Sure.
A year ago were.
I voted for Obama twice. The first time with 51% confidence. The second time with 53% confidence. And now he's a lame duck president. He was the quickest lame duck president in the history of the United States.
Yeah, yeah. It'll be interesting. I think I have this belief that Hillary. There was a guy who's now the dean of the school at Johns Hopkins, the International Studies School, who worked in the Obama state or in the Hillary State House or State Department.
State Department, yeah.
Under Richard Holbrooke.
I've heard of him.
Yeah.
He died.
He's passed away.
And he was against my opinion. He was the guy who intervened in the Yugoslav Civil War.
Yeah.
And wasted a lot of money there and a lot of lives there.
Yeah.
And he didn't have any purpose of what he was doing.
Well, this dean was his understudy, and when
right.
And apparently the Obama people treated him badly.
Let me get this straight.
Holbrooke.
Obama treated.
Holbrooke badly. Yeah.
Is that right? I thought they appointed him to India, Pakistan,
No,
and he died in Pakistan.
They treated him badly. The White House.
Oh, you mean after he got to Pakistan?
Well, just the general relationship. See, one of Hillary's real problems is they were running State Department policy out of the White House.
I see.
This guy, the dean, wrote a book called The Dispensable Nation, America in Retreat. Okay.
Right. You know more about this than I do.
Hillary, in a speech she gave, that said America is an indispensable nation. So she's pivoting off that book,
yeah.
Right? Not more than a few days later, Obama's at West Point, and he America is an indispensable nation.
Yeah.
He's parroting what Hillary said.
Yeah.
And then Susan Rice, that poor lady that's been butchered over Benghazi and now over Bergdahl, she, on one of these talk shows, talked about America being an indispensable nation in the world. So what I see is here's Hillary's pivoting away from Obama, and Obama's kind of, he doesn't want that. He doesn't want her saying, I got out because I wasn't real happy
back
with
to
this
conservative Christianity, they used to say America is the exceptional nation. This is the new world.
We were.
This is different than corrupt Europe.
We were.
Yeah, and when Washington and so forth and so on, they didn't want any entangling alliances. Machiavelli was a bad influence in the United States.
Yeah.
Now, in the 20th century, that all changed.
After World War I.
Wilson was an idealist.
The period between World War I and World War II. Yeah, Wilson, I think Obama suffers the same problem. I call it the academic problem. Obama, like Wilson, I think, lives in his head and to one side. That's why he can't palaver, he can't negotiate, he can't, he's too much of an idealist, and that can work in the classroom, but it doesn't work.
Well, it works on television. He's a great television speaker.
But
and that's how we won these elections. Television. Without television, he would have never been president.
Yeah, even there though, people have stopped listening to him. I mean, it's sad. I think it's sad.
Oh, I don't think NPR stopped listening.
Well,
They still
Google
put him
Boss,
on
yeah.
as the genius.
But
I
I
just
think
heard him
people-
give the D-Day speech, patriotic,
Yeah,
singing the songs.
I saw that. I saw that. You know,
He's a chameleon.
yeah, he's somebody who, you know, and this is conjecture on my part. When I was in law school, this was in 1969, 70, 71, 68, 69, 69. I saw young people who were radicalized, and they give talks, and I think, man, what planet are they from, you know? And it's like they could be so, you know, in a very broad brush way, concerned about mankind and the, you know, people and all
But
that.
they wouldn't take care of their grandmother if
But
she
they
was
wouldn't
sick.
take care of their grandmother. Yeah, exactly. There was a non-emotive part to them, you know. It's just strange. It was really strange.
Yeah, yeah.
They couldn't see the suffering in their own
That's true.
presence,
That is true.
you know.
They were not very good Christians.
Yeah,
You see, that's one of the problems of child raising. When I was a kid in 1948, well, I started in 35, 5 years old. 1948, I was 18. I think I only met one or two kids who admitted that they didn't have any religion or didn't want to talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
Or didn't want to believe in God.
yeah.
But the Catholics all said, I go to Mass. Now, the Jew didn't want to talk about it. He just said, I go to the synagogue. I go to the temple.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know what that was.
Yeah.
And he didn't explain to me
No.
why the temple was different.
They probably felt a little.
we
prejudiced.
we only got 5 minutes left, so why don't you use 2 or 3 minutes to kind of summarize the major points we're trying to discuss here.
Okay.
Darwin and God and...
Yeah, my feeling, my belief is that we should be able to bring stories from the Bible, the Quran, and other stories that, and you do your homework to find them, where there is science that says this is who we are.
Yeah.
We have this innate need to empathize, to sympathize, to care, to be pro-social.
Good.
And that we should use the stories from the ancients.
Right.
We should use these stories to let students understand this is who they are.
Okay.
The problem with education today, for instance, a gentleman, Coleman, wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence. It's sort of like, okay, these are buttons you can push in people.
Right.
The more crass example of that is Dale Carnegie's book on how to win friends and influence people. You know, it's crass. To make them understand, number one, that you're going to have these feelings and you should act on these feelings.
Right.
A good example is using the story of the Good Samaritan. Why would they cross over to the other side? Well, you know, it might have been a question of cleanliness. But my belief is they crossed over to the other side because they didn't want to be involved. They didn't want to be involved emotionally.
That's right.
So it wasn't their problem.
That's right.
And so, you know, at some point in a child's career, they may have to fire somebody.
Right.
Don't send them an email. You know, be person enough to understand
Right.
the human side of that. There was a judge in Toledo, a lady, that I use as an illustration when she'd sentence a young person to jail, to prison, you know, the young 20-year-old or whatever. She knew what that meant for that person, and she'd do her job, but then she'd go into the chambers and cry.
Right.
You know, I mean, she was visibly affected by the decision she had to make.
Right.
You know, don't be afraid to experience your own humanity in your relationship to other people.
True.
It's not a game of, it's not a case of pushing buttons in people to get them to do what you want them to do.
Right.
So,
Right.
And that's what I want to do is, you know, I was doing some research on shootings in public schools, or
Wow.
schools.
Well, that's terrible.
I could only find 2 instances where in a parochial school there was ever any killing.
Any killing
Yeah.
in a parochial
It's
school?
all in public schools.
That's probably true.
Parochial schools, they have a set of beliefs.
Right.
It's like there was a story of the little boy that went to, was a goofball, and so his
Were there any killings in a synagogue?
I didn't see any reference to that.
Never been in
as
any
a school,
study?
I looked only at schools, okay? Educational institutions.
Right.
One of the interesting, this kid, he wouldn't do his homework, he wouldn't pay attention, so they sent him to the Catholic school. Kid comes home the first day, goes upstairs and does his homework. Next day, he comes home and does his homework. And the parents were like, wow, these Catholics really know how to educate. So they asked him, why is it that suddenly you're doing your homework? He said, oh, these people mean business. They had this guy tacked up, nailed to a plus sign.
Okay, I think I better use my 2 minutes. I think the big difference in public schools in 1948 and today is that we had an economic discipline. When I was a kid, there was a fear of the Depression.
Yeah.
And you had to go out and deliver newspapers in order to have coins to go to college.
Yeah.
I had $500 in the bank by the time I was
A lot of money. Back then, yeah.
it was when I went away to college. Well, I used to sell newspapers. I sold tomatoes. I raked leaves. I instead of buying chocolate candy, my mother had a little bottle there. It's called Feed Mickey. Instead of a piggy bank, she had a Mickey Mouse bank. Feed Mickey. So I used to put the quarters and the dimes in that. And then I would take those down about every 3 weeks, all of those coins, and cash it in, go to the bank,
Yeah.
and put it in the deposit. And then I'd see the interest. They paid 6% interest.
Wow, that's good interest.
Well, this is a depression, right?
Yeah.
In other words, Roosevelt lowered it for the Federal Reserve. They only made 1.5% profit. And then the savers got money to put it in the bank.
Yeah.
And they had an interest, okay? Now, this was all reverse in the good old times. Started with the 50s. After Truman pay as you go. Truman and Eisenhower balanced the budget. But with Johnson, the Good Society, they went into debt and the parents went into debt.
Yeah.
They bought everything on time.
Yeah.
Automobiles first, and you couldn't buy a car on credit. When my father had a mortgage, he had to go down to the local bank.
Yeah.
And he had to pay 6% to borrow money.
Yeah.
And he paid his mortgage off. When he bought a truck, he had to pay interest. So he always went for cash.
Yeah.
And got rid of that debt. Well, that whole concept of debt, that passed over to the schools. Or in other words, my friends might have spent more on chocolate candy, but they still knew that you had to do some chores. You have a paper route or something.
Yeah. Here, Elizabeth Warren in her book has an interesting analysis of this.
Okay, we have to close now.
Okay, well, good talking with you.
Anyway, I'm glad you came. The title of this show is that debate is necessary to keep democracy. And both you and I believe in the democratic philosophy and the Christian philosophy in a very liberal way.
Yeah.
So good luck to you. I hope
Okay.
you come again.